A little over a month ago, Meta kicked me out of the nicest house I'd ever owned in this economy. Something I had taken for granted, my carefully customized Oculus home chock full of firsts, was gone without a trace. I didn't have any pictures or videos to remember it by. I was kicked out of house and home by a giant corporation, something I'd figured I'd have to wait until my 30s to experience. As bummed as I was with my sudden digital homelessness, I decided to bite the bullet and return to a project I started 9 months ago. I set aside my grief and scanned my room into VR. If I couldn't keep my Oculus home, I was going to make my own, with my own 2 hands, and an $800 iPad. If you've clicked on this video with the intention of following along and scanning an environment of your own into VR, I need to warn you of 2 things before we get started. First, I am by no means an expert on Blender, Valve's Source 2 Hammer editor, nor 3D scanning. While I intend on explaining my process in layman's terms and step by step, you should have at the very least a general understanding of how to navigate Blender and Steam VR. My second warning is that you'll need ideally an iPad Pro with a LiDAR scanner, or at the very least an iPhone 12 Plus or newer. I do know that other 3D scanning apps work for phones without LiDAR scanners, but they make their scans out of hundreds of images and are a pain in the butt to use. If you're comfortable with another 3D scanner, either through an app I don't use in this video or through a different scanning device altogether, don't worry. The first step of this video will be pretty much the same. You'll just need to save your 3D scan as a file type compatible with Blender. Now, on to the meat. This is the step that will vary the most from person to person. You can use whatever 3D scanning program or equipment you're comfortable with, and the end result will hopefully be the same. I personally started this process by downloading an app called Polycam off the iOS store. I wasn't sure what to expect when I opened the app, but I was pleasantly surprised by how user-friendly the whole experience ended up being. I simply opened a new project, pressed record, and walked around my room, which was scanned into a 3D environment with zero hassle, and within just a few minutes, I was able to move on to the next step. Okay, on a more serious note, I had no clue what I was getting into when I opened Polycam for the first time. It took a lot of trial and error, like cleaning my room, figuring out what time of day gave the best lighting, remembering to turn off my oscillating fan, and a very steady hand. But after a few attempts, I ended up with a scan that was good enough. I tried scanning my room in one go a few times and ended up with mixed results. Some scans got the geometry of the room down well, but failed at texturing the environment properly. Other scans looked great in some areas and not so much in others. At one point, I decided to scan one wall at a time and piece them all together in Blender. A decent idea theoretically, but for some reason a nightmare in execution. In the end, I ended up using a scan that seemed to get a majority of the image and geometry right and moved on.
Hit puree!
No! I'm too young!
Again, I'd like to remind you that I had zero experience with Blender going into this project. If you're even vaguely familiar with Blender, congratulations, you know more than me, and will likely laugh at my amateur explanations of what to do next. First, you'll need to download Blender, launch it, and delete the starting cube. This in itself was a monumental task for me, and even though I got sidetracked a few times, following some classic tutorials, I ended up importing the model of my room successfully. For those following along with my exact process, we'll need to go back to Polycam and export our model as a file type supported by Blender. You need to tap this funny little guy in the top right corner, navigate to Blender, and export your model as a GLTF file. Here's where I'll reveal a bit of my ignorance, because I have no clue if there's an advantage offered by getting a premium Polycam account and exporting as an OBJ file, but for my purposes, a GLTF file worked fine. Back to Blender, you'll want to navigate to your project file and import it into your workspace. You can do so by clicking File, navigating to Import, and finding your GLTF file wherever you saved it to. For some reason, the file will show as a GLB file extension, but that doesn't seem to affect anything besides causing a bit of confusion. When you get your scan into your project, don't panic if you see a blob of textureless geometry like I did. After a brief headache and scouring YouTube comment sections for an answer, I discovered that you need to find the viewport shading options, for me in the top right of the project window, and toggle from the solid object option to the material preview option. From this point on, every edit you do depends on how comfortable you are with Blender. I opted to smooth a few especially ugly faces, but didn't feel confident enough in my abilities to try and repair geometry or clean up problem textures. I did end up deleting the ceiling from my room, but not for any fancy reason. I simply disliked how Polycam scanned my ceiling lamp and figured I'd open my roof and do something fancy later. If you want to crop unwanted geometry, either whole walls or funny looking nubs, my method was going into sculpt mode, selecting the box trim tool, and selecting and deleting the geometry I didn't want. When you finish cleaning up your scan to whatever standard you hold, you can move on to exporting. You'll want to navigate back to File, Export, and select FBX. You'll want to change path mode from Auto to Copy, and click this button to embed the textures from your scan onto your file. Now we move on to the third step.
Put on these glasses, and you'll enter the world of the game.
Once you've saved your project and exported it to wherever you want to keep it, you'll want to navigate on over to Steam VR. When I went through this process, I tried to do so following the only guide I could find online on how to create a custom Steam VR environment, which I'll link below. But I found that it was entirely too vague and unhelpful to be of any use. Here's where help from a tech-savvy individual over in my Discord was necessary to move on, which I'm very grateful for. Inside the small window that opens on your desktop when you launch Steam VR, you'll want to expand the options and navigate to the Workshop tab. Shift over and select Create/Modify an Environment. Steam VR's Workshop tools should open, and you'll want to create an empty add-on and name it whatever you deem appropriate. Click Create, then click Launch Tools. A window for the asset browser should open, and you should click on the hammer icon to open the hammer editor. Click File, New, and you'll create your very own Steam VR world. You'll want to navigate to the light bulb icon, make sure you have the player start entity selected, and click anywhere in your world to create a spawn point for your VR avatar. You'll then want to switch back to the asset browser and click on the funny little fella striking a pose, which will open the model editor. You'll create a new VMDL file, navigate to where you saved your FBX file from Blender, and click Open. Next, click OK, and click the Browse button next to the Destination Directory field. A window should open that places you in your model's file. Create a new folder for your 3D scan model, name it whatever you want, and select it. Next, you'll click the Change Collision Type to use exact geometry. Now, if you click OK and a mess of wireframe shows up, don't freak out. I ran into the same issue. In fact, this was the issue that made me give up on the idea and forget about it for 9 months. Little did I know that the solution was relatively simple. You'll want to go back to Blender and reopen your scan. Navigate over to the UV Editing tab and down to Image. From there, you'll be able to save your texture as a JPEG. Keep track of where you saved that image and go back to the Asset Browser window. Go through the same process over again, but this time click these 3 dots to browse for your texture image you just scraped off your model. If you followed those steps, your model should now have the proper texture associated with it, and you're ready to complete the final steps on your path to greatness. Go back to the hammer editor and the little guy that likely thought you abandoned him for good, and drag your new model from the asset browser. If you don't see it immediately, search for it by name in the box above. Drag it into your project and adjust the model to scale. Now for 2 important tips here that I wish I had known going into this project. You'll want to make sure to only change the scale of the environment, not the player entity model. Changing the player entity won't change your scale once you go into VR. The next tip is to turn off grid-based movement for your objects. When you move the scan and your entity model around, you may notice snappy movement. Pressing Shift and W should remedy that. Next, you'll want to go back over to the light bulb icon and add a new entity into your world, this time a light source. I found I had the best luck with the spotlight, but I could see different spaces benefiting from other light sources like the Omnilight. Drag your light source into your scene and adjust till you're happy. If you go with the spotlight like I did, I'd recommend messing with its properties. You can disable shadows, increase its brightness, and change its inner and outer cone angle to give it a softer look. Since I cut my ceiling off back in Blender, I decided to add a skybox and hammer. You may have noticed it in the background of previous clips, but they're as easy to add as any other object. Just find env_sky under the list of entities and drag one into your project. If you don't like the default one, you can browse for more by clicking on this icon and searching Sky. From this point on, you'll just be going in and out of VR to make sure you've gotten the scale and spawn point where you want them. You'll do so by pressing F9 and letting your project build. Put on your headset, look around to see what you might want to adjust, and rinse and repeat until you're ready to finish and upload to the Steam VR workshop. This step was one of the worst documented and poorly explained out of this whole process, and that's saying something. You would likely never figure it out through guesswork, and I had to piece together every step through 5 different sources and outdated guides. What you'll want to do is save your project, press F9 to build one last time, then go back to the asset browser for some stupid reason, and click on the Workshop Manager icon. Name your world, Write a funny description, add a thumbnail, and apply the appropriate tags. If you want to make your world private or for friends' eyes only, select either of those two options. And if you want to let the whole world be able to explore your room for some strange reason, you can make it public. I'm not sure what kind of sick freak would want thousands of people to be able to visit his room in VR, but on a completely unrelated note, you should check out my Steam VR environment that I'll link below in the description. This whole process was a serious pain in the ass, and would have been impossible without the help of previous internet explorers before me paving the way through the murky depths of poorly documented Valve software. I'd like to give a special thank you to the people from my Discord that helped me navigate this whole experiment, and if you found this video useful or have some tips of your own, maybe consider thanking me in turn by commenting your tips, liking the video, and telling me everything is going to be okay. Well, one of those isn't really necessary, but it'd be nice.